I demand you shut down this unlawful gathering immediately or I'm calling the police." The voice thundered through my cabin office as Evelyn Cross kicked the door open without so much as a knock. A moment earlier, I'd been quietly standing beside my wine blending station, watching the late afternoon sunlight pour in through the windows. The next moment, my coffee splashed across the desk, and the air seemed to quake with the force of Evelyn's intrusion, a full-scale power trip in action. Then she froze, her eyes locked on the man seated across from me, a distinguished figure in a flawlessly tailored navy suit, swirling a glass of vintage Pinot Noir in his hand. Behind him, faint laughter and the gentle chime of clinking glasses drifted in from the dinner party. The tension was instant and electric, and it was obvious Evelyn had just chosen the wrong person to confront. Let me set the scene. My family's Vineyard cabin rests in the heart of our 40-acre estate, a charming, rustic yet refined retreat my grandfather built back in 1962. That evening, I was hosting a rare, intimate dinner for a dozen guests. It was the kind of gathering that only happens a couple of times a year, when everything falls into place. A long oak table, covered in crisp white linen, stretched across the room, illuminated by strands of string lights. Fresh roses from my grandmother's garden were arranged in delicate vases. Soft jazz played on our old speakers while the rich aroma of my 2019 Reserve Via blend aged 3 years in French Oaxaca filled the air. Among those present were Judge Patricia Morrison from the County Court, Tom Bradley from First National Bank, and, most notably, Senator William Hayes, a dear friend of my father's for over 30 years who had driven 2 hours to attend. The senator and I had been in the middle of a thoughtful conversation about terroir, how soil and climate give wine its soul, when Evelyn made her grand entrance. She burst in, brandishing a clipboard in one hand and a phone in the other, already live-streaming which she clearly believed would be her moment of glory. Evelyn Cross, a 5'2" and overflowing with authority, had been president of our Hillrest Meadows Homeowners Association for 4 years. In that time, she'd made a sport out of hunting for violations, real or imagined. She measured grass height with a ruler and issued formal letters over mailbox paint colors. But as she stood there in her immaculate blazer, gaping at the scene before her, she looked like someone who had accidentally walked into the wrong set. Silence fell, a thick, uncomfortable silence. A dozen pairs of eyes fixed on her. I could see recognition dawning across her face. Senator Hayes, ever the diplomat, gently set his wine glass down and spoke in the calm, measured tone honed over decades in politics. "Evelyn," he said, raising one eyebrow, "I think you may have the wrong address." I had to admire his restraint. Personally, I was fighting to keep from laughing. Here was the woman who had spent months trying to find anything to use against my family's business, and she had just publicly interrupted a legal dinner party attended by one of the most respected politicians in the state. Any reasonable person might have backed down. Evelyn didn't. She looked straight into her phone camera, the red recording light blinking, and declared without a hint of hesitation, "This is exactly the kind of proof we need of political corruption happening right here in our community." My stomach sank. She wasn't embarrassed. She was doubling down. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment outburst, it was calculated. And I was watching the setup unfold, live, broadcast to who knows how many viewers. I kept my voice steady. "Evelyn, this is a private dinner on private property. All the proper permits are in place here. Would you like to see them?" I gestured to my desk, where the catering license and temporary event permit were displayed, a paperwork I'd filed weeks in advance precisely to avoid problems like this. The senator nodded approvingly. Judge Morrison only shook her head, clearly unimpressed by the scene. But Evelyn was too busy spinning her narrative to hear reason. And then I saw something that cut deeper than her accusations. The expression on my 16-year-old son's face. Tommy had been proudly helping serve wine, thrilled to be part of something special. Now he was watching his father accused of corruption in front of people we both admired. The confusion and hurt in his eyes hit harder than any threat Evelyn could make. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore, it was about my family's name, our legacy, and the vineyard my grandfather had built from nothing after immigrating here with nothing but determination. Evelyn eventually left, still muttering into her phone about political conspiracies and neighborhood integrity. But the smug smile she flashed before leaving, the perfectly timed entrance, and her uncanny knowledge of our gathering told me this was no ordinary complaint. Senator Hayes caught my eye, giving a subtle nod that told me he understood the weight of what had just happened. We both knew that in today's world, perception could outweigh truth, and Evelyn had just manufactured a dangerous one. I didn't yet realize how far she was willing to go, but I was about to find out. The next morning, my phone buzzed relentlessly of 47 missed calls, hundreds of notifications. Evelyn's live stream had exploded overnight on Nextdoor, under the inflammatory headline, "Local Winery Bribes Politicians." It already had thousands of views, with comments ranging from furious calls for investigation to shocked messages from actual customers. By the next morning, the storm had moved beyond our neighborhood gossip circle. My son, Tommy, found me in the kitchen, laptop open, his face tight with worry. "Dad, you need to see this," he said. We were now trending on TikTok under the tag #VineyardGate. Someone had taken Evelyn's live stream and turned it into a dramatic mini-movie complete with ominous music, slow-motion shots of her bursting into the room, and exaggerated sound effects. My peaceful dinner gathering had been recast as some sort of political scandal thriller, but Evelyn wasn't relying solely on social media chaos. By mid-morning, she had fired her first real shot. A notification popped up in my inbox. She'd filed an urgent complaint with the state liquor board. In it, she accused us of operating without proper permits and of serving alcohol to unverified individuals in violation of commercial regulations. The wording was a bureaucratic masterpiece stuffed with official-sounding phrases about public safety and unlawful business activity. The problem? Every single permit was valid and on display, yet her stunt meant I'd have to burn time, energy, and money to prove something that was already documented. Her next move buzzed literally over my head. From my office window, I spotted a drone making slow, deliberate passes over our vineyard, no doubt recording evidence to fit whatever violations she planned to invent. The third strike landed online. By lunchtime, our Google and Yelp pages were swamped with one-star reviews from accounts that had clearly never set foot on our property. Comments accusing us of corrupt practices and political favoritism piled up faster than I could flag them as spam. Each fake review was a punch to the gut. Our reputation was built on decades of hard work, honesty, and real relationships. I'd inherited the vineyard from my father, who inherited it from his father before him. Watching our legacy get shredded by coordinated online attacks made my blood boil. That's when I started digging. A quick property records search revealed something curious. Evelyn had bought the plot of land right next to our vineyard just 3 months earlier, paying well over market value for a hillside that couldn't easily be developed. Then I found a quietly filed application with the County Planning Commission of plans for a luxury resort and event venue on that exact plot. It was beginning to make sense. Later that afternoon, I stopped by to see Mrs. Rodriguez, our 70-year-old neighbor who had lived here longer than anyone. She wasted no time filling in the blanks. "She's been by 5 times this week," Mrs. Rodriguez said, shaking her head. "Always asking about property values, how noisy you get, whether I'd ever consider selling. Something about it just didn't sit right." When I called my attorney, David Chen, about the liquor board complaint, he confirmed my growing suspicion. "Marcus, you need to know this," he said, voice low. "I did some checking. Evelyn isn't just an overzealous HOA president. She was legal counsel for Grandview Development Corporation until about 6 months ago. They've been buying up rural properties across the county for a massive casino resort project." The realization hit like a freight train. This wasn't about HOA rules. It was a targeted business play, and our vineyard stood in the way of a multi-million-dollar development. The situation escalated again when a state inspector showed up unannounced. He introduced himself as Thomas Brennan, flashed his credentials and then broke into a grin. "Marcus, we had econ together with Professor Williams. Remember?" I hadn't seen Tom since college, and the relief was instant until he leaned closer. "Listen, I've got to do this by the book," he said quietly. "Whoever filed this complaint has serious pull. Be careful they've done their homework." He conducted the inspection thoroughly and fairly, finding nothing amiss with our permits or operations. Still, as I sat back down in my father's old chair afterward, the weight of it all hit me. Through the window, I saw Tommy sitting on the porch, phone in hand, scrolling through comments that called his father a political crook. His eyes were wet. That broke me. These weren't just attacks on my livelihood, they were attacks on my family. That evening, a certified letter arrived. Evelyn's attorney gave me 72 hours to shut down all commercial activity on our property or face a $2.4 million lawsuit for supposed violations of community standards and public safety laws. It was a legal sledgehammer meant to terrify us into surrender. The message was clear. They didn't just want to stop our events, they wanted our land. The following morning, my unexpected ally emerged. Tommy. He'd been quiet over breakfast, but I could see him thinking. "Dad," he said, pulling out his laptop, "remember that online course I've been taking? The one about open source intelligence? I think I can help." Over the past semester, he'd been learning how to access and analyze public records, skills that suddenly felt like they might change everything. Tommy's open source intelligence course was meant to teach students about government transparency. I don't think the instructor imagined it would blow open a local corruption scheme. In just 2 hours, using nothing more than publicly available HOA financial records, Tommy uncovered a trail that made my stomach twist. "Dad, check this out," he said, pointing at the screen. In the past year, $180,000 had been shifted from the Community Maintenance Fund into something labeled Legal Consultation Services. The recipient, Cross Associates Legal Services, owned by none other than Evelyn's husband, Richard Cross. The conflict of interest was glaring. But Tommy didn't stop there. Over the last 3 years, the HOA had paid that firm more than $340,000 for consultations, all while community essentials like pool upkeep and landscaping were left to deteriorate. Residents had been complaining for years, baffled by the constant HOA fee increases. Now we knew why. It was classic embezzlement, hidden under layers of legal jargon most homeowners would never think to question. While we were pulling at the threads of her financial scheme, Evelyn escalated her harassment to new heights. From my office window, I saw a small group gather at the edge of our Vineyard entrance. They held professionally printed protest signs accusing us of political corruption and demanding community safety. The trouble was, I recognized half of them from the downtown temp agency. They weren't concerned citizens if they were paid actors in a staged outrage. Still, the local station, bought it hook, line, and sinker. That evening they aired a segment titled "Family Winery Accused of Political Corruption," complete with sweeping shots of the fake protest and tightly edited clips from Evelyn's viral video. Watching our family's name dragged through the mud by manufactured drama was like being trapped in a slow-motion accident you couldn't stop. But the worst was the drone. What had once been the occasional overhead pass turned into constant harassment. Evelyn's flycam now hovered so close to our office windows it startled guests, even following them out to their cars after tastings. The unending buzz seeped into our daily lives, fraying nerves. Jose, our Vineyard manager of 15 years, had begun glancing skyward every few minutes. Even Murphy, our golden retriever, barked anxiously at the faintest hum. Evelyn wanted us to feel cornered on our own land. Reacting blindly would only play into her hands. I needed a strategy. I began speaking privately with other home members and neighbors I'd known for years but had never discussed community politics with. What I heard was telling. Dissatisfaction with Evelyn's leadership was everywhere. Janet Williams, the HOA treasurer and once Evelyn's closest ally, met me at the coffee shop and lowered her voice. "She's threatened to sue anyone who questions her decisions," Janet admitted. "What Tommy found a broken bar, that's exactly the kind of thing I've suspected for months." Others shared similar experiences, stories of intimidation, arbitrary fines, and intentionally murky financial reports. The picture forming was of a president who saw the HOA not as a service but as a personal power base. Then Senator Hayes, who had stayed diplomatically silent since the dinner party fiasco, called with a lead. "Marcus, there's someone you should meet," he said. "Isabella Chase, State Journal. She's working on something that might help you." We met at a quiet restaurant half an hour out of town. Isabella came prepared. She'd been investigating HOA corruption across the state for 8 months, uncovering a coordinated system of embezzlement and land manipulation involving multiple associations and real estate developers. "Evelyn isn't acting alone," Isabella explained, sliding a thick folder across the table. She's part of a network of HOA presidents who pressure property owners into selling below market value. They use shell companies to buy up parcels, then make life unbearable for the neighbors until they sell. Once they've got enough land, they flip it to big developers for massive profit. The documents were damning: a bank record showing questionable payments, a web of LLCs, all leading back to the same group of investors. My vineyard wasn't just inconvenient to Thema, it was the last piece of a 40-acre puzzle worth tens of millions. Then came her final revelation. Isabella pulled up video from a security camera at Hillrest Country Club. Just 3 weeks earlier, it had captured Evelyn meeting with two men in sharp suits, as senior executives from Grandview Development Corporation. The audio was faint, but their posture and the exchange of folders made the purpose of the meeting obvious. "Marcus," Isabella said, sliding a flash drive toward me, "you're not just up against an overbearing neighbor. You're staring down an organized criminal operation that's been hiding in plain sight for years." The weight of her words was heavy, but oddly clarifying. For the first time since Evelyn had stormed into our dinner, I knew exactly what we were fighting and why. This wasn't about HOA rules. It wasn't about noise complaints. It was greed, pure and simple, and now I had the evidence to prove it. Driving home, the folder and flash drive felt like they burned a hole in my jacket pocket. This fight was no longer just about saving my family's business. It was about standing up for every homeowner bullied into submission, every community gutted by backroom deals, and every family who still believed property rights mattered. The next morning, before I could even finish my coffee, someone pounded on the front door. At 7 o'clock the next morning, I woke to a loud knock echoing through the house. Through the peephole, I spotted a sharply dressed woman in a dark suit holding an official-looking envelope. She introduced herself politely, but her tone was firm as she handed over documents that froze the blood in my veins. A $2.4 million lawsuit for defamation and intentional interference with business relationships. Evelyn's attorneys claimed that my supposed collaboration with Senator Hayes and the press had tarnished her reputation and endangered her livelihood. The irony was almost too much to process. This was the same woman who had publicly live-streamed outrageous lies about me, yet here I was, being painted as the villain. But I knew all too well how deep pockets and high-priced lawyers could twist the truth until reality bent out of shape. By that afternoon, Evelyn had fed the story to cooked, and the evening news was a gut punch. There I was, being introduced as a wealthy wine mogul endangering neighborhood safety. The reporter stood dramatically at our vineyard's gates, talking about powerful landowners who believe they're above the law, while the screen flashed carefully edited clips designed to make our family's business look like some kind of crime syndicate. Tommy and I sat in the living room, watching decades of family legacy unravel on the TV. The helplessness was crushing. The hardest moment was seeing my son scroll through social media, trying to keep up with the latest lies being spread about us. The next blow came early the following morning. Tom Bradley from First National Bank, the same man who'd been enjoying wine at our table just days before, he called with a strained, almost apologetic voice. The bank, he explained, was reviewing our business loan after receiving anonymous concerns about our stability. I didn't need a translation. Someone influential had made a call, and now our financing was hanging by a thread. 30 years of flawless payments meant nothing when power and politics got involved. But that afternoon brought a sliver of light. Isabella Chase's first article hit the front page of the State Journal under the headline, "HOA Presidents, the New Mafia." It was devastating in its precision. She laid out how nearly $900,000 had vanished from 4 different HOAs across the county, all disguised as legal consulting fees funneled into firms owned by relatives of board members. Evelyn's setup took center stage. Cross and Associates had pocketed $340,000 while Hillrest Meadows fell into disrepair and residents' dues kept climbing. Forensic accountants in the piece didn't mince words, calling the scheme classic embezzlement masked as legitimate expenses. The article set off a wave of community outrage. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been quietly documenting Evelyn's antics for months, organized a group called Seniors for Marcus. In days, 23 home members had signed on, demanding Evelyn's immediate resignation. These weren't rabble-rousers, they were longtime residents who had seen their neighborhood crumble while the HOA president lined her pockets. Meanwhile, Tommy turned his frustration into action. He launched a TikTok campaign called Save Delicac Vineyard. With a mix of humor and righteous anger, his videos exploded, gaining over 50,000 followers in just 2 days and transforming our local feud into a symbol of grassroots resistance against corruption. Evelyn, however, wasn't finished. Her moves grew more desperate and more reckless. She hired a private investigator to follow me around the clock, apparently hoping to catch me doing something scandalous. He was so obvious that neighbors began phoning to ask about the strange man in the white sedan parked outside with binoculars. Her next blunder was even worse, trying to bribe State Inspector Thomas Brennan with $15,000 to file a false health code report against us. Unfortunately for her, Brennan was already cooperating with the FBI and wearing a wire. That recording would later become a centerpiece in her criminal trial. She then tried to poison our supplier relationships, calling around to spread concerns about our reputation. This backfired spectacularly when Jeppy Melli, who had provided artisanal cheeses for our events for over a decade, phoned me directly. "Marcus," he said in his thick Italian accent, "this woman tells me you are a criminal." I tell her she is crazy, and I never do business with liars. Word traveled quickly among the local suppliers, and instead of isolating us, Evelyn had unified the small business community in our defense. Then came the real breakthrough from none other than Mrs. Rodriguez. She had been far more strategic than I realized. During one of Evelyn's visits to pressure her, she had quietly recorded their conversation on an old cassette player. On it, Evelyn offered her $25,000 in exchange for fabricated complaints about noise and property damage from our vineyard. When Mrs. Rodriguez played the tape for me, her hands trembling with righteous fury, I knew we finally had the undeniable evidence we needed, a proof no lawyer could spin away. With that and Isabella's continued reporting, I decided it was time to stop playing defense. As an home member, I could legally demand an emergency meeting if I secured signatures from 25% of the membership. In less than 2 days, we had them. I invited not only the neighbors but also local reporters, Senator Hayes, and District Attorney Patricia Walsh. The plan was straightforward: put every piece of evidence on the table and let the truth speak for itself. The day before the showdown, Evelyn made one last pathetic attempt to derail USA filing for a restraining order and accusing me of stalking and harassment. Judge Morrison, who had personally witnessed her behavior at our dinner party, took one look at the petition and actually laughed. "Miss Cross," the judge began, "a broken bar according to the court's own records, laying out proof of embezzlement in a community forum isn't harassment, it's performing a public service." That same day, Senator Hayes issued a formal statement praising our family as a model of integrity and service to the district. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She made her boldest move yet that evening, showing up at our vineyard with the sheriff's deputy beside her, waving a demand for an immediate property seizure. Her claim that we had outstanding tax violations that gave the county authority to shut us down on the spot. What she didn't know was that I had grown cautious enough to keep the county tax assessor's personal line saved in my phone. One quick call confirmed what I already suspected: our taxes were fully paid, our assessments accurate, and Evelyn had just lied to a law enforcement officer. The deputy apologized and drove off, leaving her standing in our driveway, the weight of her false accusation hanging in the air. I knew then the upcoming community meeting was going to be far more explosive than I'd imagined. The Hillrest Meadows Community Center hadn't seen a turnout like this in 4 decades. By early evening, more than 200 residents had crammed into the hall, with dozens more gathered outside, pressing against the windows for a glimpse. The atmosphere felt electrical, like the charged stillness before a lightning storm. I'd arrived early to arrange the evidence via bank statements, HOA budget printouts, and copies of Isabella's articles on tables at the front. Television crews moved about, adjusting cameras, while reporters whispered over their microphones about the showdown. When Evelyn entered, she walked with the air of someone who still believed she owned the room. 2 high-priced attorneys trailed her, followed by a small cluster of supporters I recognized as employees from Grandview Development. Clipboard in hand, she sat at the head table, wearing her usual mask of authority. But I caught a fleeting flicker in her eyes and uncertainty. Senator Hayes opened the meeting with a short speech on the importance of transparency and community leadership. lending the proceedings a weight that made this more than just neighborhood gossip. Then it was my turn. I'd rehearsed this moment endlessly, but as I stood before my neighbors, I felt the gravity of 3 generations of honest work pressing on my shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, "we're here tonight because someone has been stealing from our community. It's time you heard the truth." The slideshow spoke for itself: money trails, recordings of intimidation, and a precise timeline of how Evelyn siphoned HOA funds while targeting anyone who opposed her. Mrs. Rodriguez's account of the $25,000 bribe offer hit the room like a hammer. At 70, her word carried weight, and her anger was palpable. Tommy's segment on the harassment campaign was equally damning, revealing Evelyn's use of fake profiles and even paid agitators. But the real turning point came when Janet Williams, the HOA treasurer and Evelyn's longtime ally, took the microphone. The shock on Evelyn's face was unmistakable as Janet opened a folder filled with financial records. "I've carried this burden for months," Janet admitted, her voice trembling. "Evelyn told me these payments were legitimate and warned me against questioning them. But I can't stay silent knowing $340,000 of our neighbor's money is gone." She then laid out each suspicious transaction, every fabricated invoice, and the network of shell companies funneling funds into Evelyn's accounts. Evelyn's counterattack was frantic as she accused me of manipulating Mrs. Rodriguez, labeled Isabella's reporting as fake news, and threatened lawsuits against nearly everyone in the room. But the desperation in her voice told its own story. The vote came swiftly: a 187 for her removal, just 12 in her favor. The room erupted in 5 minutes of applause, a release of years of pent-up frustration. Evelyn, however, remained at the front, her expression twisted in fury. "This isn't over," she snapped, gathering her papers. "You don't know what you've done. You'll regret this." Minutes later, my phone rang. Jose, our Vineyard manager, was on the line, his voice tight with urgency. "Our irrigation system had been sabotaged during the meeting. Damage estimates ran to $50,000, and without quick repairs, we could lose the entire harvest." When we got to the vineyard, the security footage told the rest of the story: someone in dark clothing cutting through the fence at 3 a.m., armed with bolt cutters and wire strippers, systematically destroying the system. Security footage revealed the saboteur methodically dismantling our vineyard's irrigation system. Detective Sarah Martinez traced the license plate of a car spotted a couple of blocks from the scene at the time of the vandalism straight back to Evelyn Cross. The muddy boot prints scattered across the vineyard matched the distinctive designer footwear she'd worn to nearly every home meeting for 2 years. A search of her car turned up a receipt from Murphy's Hardware, time-stamped just hours before the damage, listing purchases of bolt cutters and wire strippers. District Attorney Patricia Walsh wasted no time. Within 2 days of the community meeting, Evelyn faced a barrage of charges: felony embezzlement, criminal vandalism, attempted bribery, and harassment. The media pounced. Footage of her arrest at her real estate office, carried out in front of rolling cameras, spread online like wildfire. Over 2 million views in the first week. The image of Evelyn in handcuffs, still clutching her ever-present clipboard, became an emblem of justice catching up to corruption. But the most satisfying moment for me came 3 days later. I was re-watching the security footage from the meeting when I spotted Ida Evelyn's original live stream, the one where she froze upon seeing Senator Hayes at our dinner. Knowing what I knew now, I could read her expression differently: the flicker of panic, the instant calculation, the desperate attempt to twist her embarrassment into an accusation against us. The woman who believed she was invincible had finally tripped over her own arrogance. That evening, I sat in my office overlooking the vineyard still alive thanks to emergency repairs funded by generous community donations, and thought back to the night Evelyn first barged into our lives. We'd gone from targets of a relentless harassment campaign to examples of what happens when neighbors unite against corruption. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for that night, justice felt tangible. When Evelyn's trial began, the courthouse steps were a sea of cameras and reporters. What started as a neighborhood dispute had exploded into a statewide scandal. News crews came from as far as San Francisco. I sat in the gallery with Tommy, Mrs. Rodriguez, and Isabella, watching Evelyn shuffle into the courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of her trademark power suits. Her defense attorney, Marcus Rothstein, wasted no time laying out their strategy, claiming I had masterminded an elaborate setup to ruin an honest public servant. But District Attorney Walsh's case was precise and crushing. She laid out bank statements, audio clips, and witness testimony that revealed a deliberate pattern of theft and abuse of authority. Then the trial shifted into an entirely new arena. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Martinez took the stand with a thick binder and dropped a revelation that stunned everyone. Evelyn wasn't just a corrupt HOA president, as she was part of a 12-state criminal network involving land development fraud and home manipulation worth over $47 million. The scheme, Martinez explained, was as calculated as it was ruthless. HOA leaders identified valuable properties, harassed owners into selling, and then flipped the land to partner developers for massive profits. The FBI had been quietly tracking the so-called home mafia for a year and a half, compiling evidence of coordinated corruption stretching from California to Texas. For my family, the vindication was overwhelming. Every accusation against us was not only dismissed but officially recognized as part of a larger criminal conspiracy. The state honored us for exposing corruption, and Senator Hayes announced a new bill, the Marcus Delicac Whistleblower Protection Act, to shield property owners from HOA retaliation. Our community rebounded with remarkable speed. A new HOA board was elected in a record-breaking turnout, implementing reforms Evelyn would have never tolerated: public financial reports, live-streamed meetings, and a citizen oversight committee. Local businesses that Evelyn had once tried to intimidate now stood with us, donating labor and materials to repair the Vineyard. Jeppy Morelli even organized a community festival to celebrate unity and resilience. Evelyn's downfall unfolded with poetic precision. She was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison under RICO statute as the first HOA official in California to face such charges. Her husband lost his law license and his firm dissolved after being implicated in the money laundering scheme. Their assets were frozen, their influence shattered. Restitution proceedings quickly followed, and Evelyn's world crumbled piece by piece. The grand home where she had plotted her harassment schemes was seized by the bank, while her fleet of luxury vehicles, symbols of her ill-gotten power, were sold off to help repay the people she'd wronged. But the shockwaves from the case didn't stop at our neighborhood's borders. Isabella's determined work had ignited a full-scale federal investigation, resulting in arrests across 4 states. 23 HOA officials now faced serious criminal charges, from embezzlement to conspiracy. Grandview Development Corporation, the company at the heart of the land grab scheme, saw its top executives marched into court under federal fraud indictments. The fallout even reached state capitals, where lawmakers began drafting stronger oversight laws and financial transparency rules for HOAs statewide. On a personal level, the victories felt even sweeter. A state magazine featured Marcus Wine in a cover story titled "Vintage of Justice," sparking a surge in orders from people eager to support the Vineyard that had stood firm against corruption. Tommy's bravery in using his tech skills to unravel the HOA's fraud earned him early admission to MIT, where he planned to study cybersecurity with a focus on defending small businesses from digital abuse. His application essay, "How I Helped Take Down the Home Mafia," soon became assigned reading in digital citizenship programs nationwide. Mrs. Rodriguez, an unlikely yet fierce hero of our fight, was invited to join the Vineyard as our official community liaison, perfect for her gift of uniting people and spotting manipulation tactics a mile away. Her forthcoming memoir, tentatively titled "How I Helped Take Down a Sociopath," had already drawn strong interest from publishers looking for true stories of everyday citizens fighting back against entrenched power. And in the midst of all the rebuilding, something unexpected blossomed between Isabella and me. What began as a professional mission to uncover the truth slowly deepened into a genuine connection. Our first official quiet dinner at the Vineyard, seated at the same table where Evelyn had once stormed Ina, was a poetic reminder that her attempts to destroy my family had instead led me to someone who would become my partner in both love and justice. The Vineyard's fortunes soared beyond anything we'd imagined. Bookings jumped by more than 400%, drawing visitors from all over the state who wanted to see the place that had become a symbol of resistance. We expanded, acquiring 3 neighboring properties that went up for sale after their own HOA harassment networks collapsed with Evelyn's empire. Our Justice Reserve Winia, crafted from the very vine she had tried to ruin, quickly became our bestseller. Corporate retreats began pouring in, with organizations seeking leadership training grounded in integrity and resilience. Yet, even with all the triumphs, I couldn't shake the sense that this was just one battle in a much larger war. The corruption we'd uncovered was too deep, too interconnected to vanish with one conviction. Standing in the golden light of sunset, looking over the vines that had survived Evelyn's sabotage, I wondered what other secrets lay buried in the manicured neighborhoods around USA and who would have the courage to dig them out. 6 months after her sentencing, Delroy Vineyard was unrecognizable from the place it had been before. Morning light streamed into my office as I reviewed booking requests stretching nearly a year and a half ahead. Our story had grown far beyond our town, with 60 Minutes airing a segment called How One Man Fought HOA Corruption to an audience of 12 million. Netflix had purchased the documentary rights, promising a gripping account of grassroots justice. The changes in our community were just as remarkable. The Delroy Standard became a statewide benchmark for HOA transparency, adopted by over 40 communities. Legislators visited regularly to learn how genuine community involvement could prevent the kind of rot that had nearly destroyed us. Our annual Unity Festival, once just a small neighborhood gathering, had transformed into a statewide celebration drawing civic leaders, journalists, and families who believed in the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Tommy's nonprofit, Youth Against Community Corruption, had expanded into 12 states, training young people to use open-source intelligence tools to monitor local government accountability. His MIT professors were so impressed by his real-world work that they invited him to co-author a paper on digital tools for civic engagement. Watching my son turn his anger into positive change made me prouder than any business success could. Meanwhile, Mrs. Rodriguez had become something of a folk hero. Her memoir was climbing bestseller lists, and she'd been invited to speak at senior centers nationwide about identifying and reporting elder abuse and financial exploitation. At 71, she had discovered a flair for public speaking that caught everyone off guard, including herself. Her signature line, delivered with perfect comedic timing, never failed to bring the house down. Never underestimate a woman with a casserole dish and a grudge. Never underestimate an old woman armed with a cassette recorder and an unshakable sense of justice. Mrs. Rodriguez liked to say, and by now, the whole state knew she meant it. Our business growth had shattered every forecast. The 3 new properties we'd acquired gave us the ability to host weekend retreats centered on ethical leadership, drawing in executives from major corporations eager to learn how to uphold integrity under pressure. The Justice Reserve label had become so sought after that our top-tier bottles now had a waiting list. Many corporate clients booked our venue specifically because of our reputation for standing firm against corruption, turning the Vineyard into an unlikely case study in business ethics. But the most profound change was personal: the deepening connection between Isabella and me. The battles we'd fought side by side had created a trust and closeness far beyond a mere professional partnership. She had moved her investigative journalism work to our region, quickly building a reputation as one of the most formidable corruption reporters on the West Coast. That first Christmas together, sharing laughter and stories with Tommy and Mrs. Rodriguez around the fireplace in our newly renovated tasting room, felt like the family warmth I'd been dreaming of since my divorce. Still, even as new traditions took root, reminders of unfinished battles would surface. Federal agents continued to uncover links between Evelyn's web of influence and other corruption schemes across the country. Just last month, 3 more HOA presidents had been arrested, and the FBI estimated that similar rackets were quietly operating in dozens of communities. It was heartening to know our fight had emboldened others, but sobering to realize our story was far from unique. Then came the envelope. It arrived on a Tuesday morning in late November, a plain, unmarked, and heavy with implication. Inside was a photograph of Evelyn in a prison visiting room, seated across from a sharply dressed man I didn't recognize. A short, handwritten note read, "The Grandview Network runs deeper than you think." Attached was a business card from an offshore investment firm, its logo naggingly familiar though I couldn't place it. Isabella immediately began tracing connections between Grandview and a web of international development companies. Her digging uncovered troubling details: Shell Corporation snapping up land near 3 other wineries, each with opaque ownership structures, and a newly installed HOA president in nearby Riverside Estates with a murky employment history, unexplained career gaps, and financial records that didn't match his stated income. As the sun dipped behind the mountains that evening, I stood among the vines that had once been targets for destruction but now thrived, and thought about how far we'd come since Evelyn first barged into our lives. We had defended our legacy and prevailed, yet victory had shown us an undeniable truth: corruption doesn't vanish, it adapts. Pull it up in one place, and it sprouts somewhere else. The question wasn't if we'd face this kind of threat again, but when. Senator Hayes had put it best during a visit while savoring a glass of Marcus' finest vintage: sometimes when you tug on one thread, the whole fabric starts to unravel. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight, surrounded by a community that had learned to fight for itself, justice felt like a cause worth guarding every single day. Have you ever felt powerless against corrupt officials or overbearing neighbors who think they're untouchable? Marcus' journey shows that ordinary people can push back and win when they stand united with courage and hard evidence. If you're up against HOA bullies, local corruption, or workplace abusers, remember, you're not alone. Real strategies exist to take on what feels impossible. Tap that like button if this story gave you hope, and subscribe to Ya Stories for more powerful accounts of justice, courage, and communities that refuse to be intimidated. And congratulations for making it to the end without suffering emotional damage. This is Ya Stories. Our team has been shut down 3 times for excessive truth-telling, but we'll be back with more HOA chaos than your cul-de-sac can handle.